want me to look at the camera or look at you?
The camera.
Okay. I think if you had to sort of generalize it, there are three aspects which are key. Hunger, it's very important. Focusing on key objectives. Energy. So you can have hunger, which is looking, being aspirational, looking forward for growth. You need focus to determine your objectives and to achieve success. And you need energy to kind of carry it through. So I would say those are the three characteristics that I think are generic pretty much to most industries and most experiences. I think there's really a mixture of two. There's one where this sort of concept of Daniel Kahneman's article on thinking fast and thinking slow, which is not allowing your intuition to overweigh your cognitive response and your cognitive response to overweigh intuition. And what that actually means in practice is that sometimes you start getting emotionally attached to things a little bit too much, and you might believe in something too much or might not believe in something, and therefore you might make a critical business mistake, and vice versa. You start thinking of things too academically, and you don't really appreciate the power of individuals on the success of business. So I think a clear challenge has been having that right balance in approaching business and thinking through of how to move forward, and not allowing people's framing of decisions to sort of influence you the wrong way, to have a better perspective on the range of opportunities and constantly looking out to learn more to kind of grow. Yeah, I mean, a good example from a business perspective is that we spend a lot of time in really investing in and believing in the growth of Central Europe, and it was really a fantastic opportunity for us. We did very well. We made quite a lot of money in the principle of actually investing in markets where consumers were developing and growing. I think what we got a little carried away is we started really believing in our own story, and we started taking on bigger and bigger risks and bigger projects. And we didn't really cognitively kind of take a step back and say, well, wait a minute, this relies on too many other third parties for that project to work, given the size of it, given the requirements of planning, et cetera. And those third parties really couldn't deliver on time. So the mistake evolved into essentially not properly pricing the time it took for that investment to actually ultimately realize, and therefore we got hurt when the global financial crisis happened. It doesn't mean the market was necessarily bad. It doesn't necessarily mean the actual approach was incorrect. It was mispricing what we call duration risk in the industry. So that was a challenge of being more aware of past and experiences and kind of learning and growing from those mistakes. Well, I think there's a lot of aspects to what it means to be Jewish, what it means to be of faith, and I think an important part of it is balance, and humility. We're in a business, especially when you manage third-party money and your own money, you have an enormous amount of fiduciary responsibility, and you have to be very, very careful not to allow perhaps your ego or your self-confidence to get carried away. And what effectively faith does, it helps remind you that actually there's a bigger story here, that we're part of a larger plan, we're part of a larger group of people, and that range of responsibilities, which are quite massive and quite significant, help kind of rebalance you and help drive humility. And I think humility balanced with confidence is a very important characteristic of a successful business person in a very long term. In the short term, you can do very, very well without having any humility, but over the longer term, that experience proves to you that humility is quite important. So to me, the Jewish faith, particularly the Jewish faith, and frankly religion, is extraordinarily important in helping create that balance. That's a good question, because I don't really consider myself great at human resources. In fact, I have a very good partner who does a lot of that. But there's a concept in I believe within the Israeli army of acharei. It means after me. I really believe in that as a culture, which is it is my responsibility to lead. I've been vested by that responsibility by the team, and what I try to do is kind of hopefully be a source of values and of strength and of energy for the wider organization. So my personal view on how to manage or how to effectively work with people is to try to be honest, to be transparent, to help define objectives for individuals, both big objectives and small objectives, to really have a very good team of people who you work with or your partners who help deliver that message, and to create a culture where people feel good to work at and feel that you're actually giving back and adding value. One of the great things that I discovered this year is that we did the third party did a questionnaire on our business, and they came up with the sort of top 5 reasons why people want to work at our company. And one of the top 3 was the impact we make on others. Now that's pretty amazing when you think about a private equity fund management business where one of the top 3 reasons why individuals work here is because they feel like they're adding value and giving back to others. And I think that to me is perhaps one of my crowning moments or greatest elements of our business. Well, it's kind of simple. I've never viewed myself as having a lot of inherent skill. In fact, I probably argue I didn't have much inherent skill. But through the years, I've trained myself. But one of the things I did have, a strong attribute I recognize, is I have a lot of energy. So I said, okay, well, if I gave, quote, 10% of my time to energy, then that would be okay. I used to work 80 plus hours a week, so roughly 10 to 15% came up to roughly 10 hours. Now, the good news about that number or that time is that could be at night, that could be on the weekends, it could be a variety of different times it happens, which you're able to do. So a lot of the charity work I used to do was largely on the weekend. Now some of it is at night, some of it's early in the morning. Some of it just adds up from a lot of little bits, but 10 hours seems to be the right number, and broadly that seems to what has worked out pretty well. That's a really key question. It's not obvious. First of all, how do you define efficiency? So if you define efficiency as, let's say, the lowest amount of costs associated with a charity relative to the greatest amount of money being deployed to its cause, or what we would call the burn rate, a key aspect, people would argue, would be to merge a lot of the back office of different charities to help provide kind of that lower cost ratio. The slight problem with that is that those who do charitable work and those who are passionate about those different causes need to feel a bit entrepreneurial. So if you merge them into a large organization, they sort of lose that entrepreneurial edge, and that becomes a challenge. So my simplest way simplest goal is to really have metric measurement, which is really the holy grail, if I can use the expression on this channel, of charity, which is how do you define what are the metrics that you're trying to achieve and make sure that you actually are looking at those metrics on a regular basis and you're achieving them. Because I think the mistake that has happened historically in charities is those metrics drift. They become hard to measure, become a bit warped, and as a result, you really can't go to your donor, whether it's the person who's giving you money or the person you're helping, and say, look what we've been able to do for you. So I think it's really important to have that metric measurement, as a primary tool in managing charity. Well, I have the benefit of really essentially growing up in 2 cultures. I spent, call it the first half of my life and part of my career in America, and a large part of my career in England, and living amongst British and Europeans. And I've seen how Jews behave, frankly, across the United States, because I grew up in New York partially, and I went to school in Chicago, which is the Midwest, and I've seen how Jews behave here. And I think the message that I've tried to live my life is not to be afraid. I mean, I think we are a strong people. We have a strong faith. I think we give an enormous amount to ourselves, but we give perhaps even sometimes a greater amount to society, wider society. And I think the principle of Tikkun Olam is something that we're obligated to do. So when I take that back to business, I think it's really important that in any business person, any person who works in industry, really shouldn't be afraid of their faith and afraid of their values and afraid of their principles. I think those who hide from that responsibility or are embarrassed or afraid actually end up living in a much worse situation because they're always constantly playing catch up or trying to figure out how to deal with situations given the fact that they've obscured part of their life. I think there's nothing wrong with being proud of being Jewish. I think there's nothing wrong with being proud of our values. I think our values add an enormous amount to the wider community, and I have friends across multiple faiths, And we share a lot of common values. And I think they respect us more when we're proud of what we are and we're proud of what we do. And we work hard in ensuring that continues. At the same token, perhaps on the negative side, I think it's really important not to be a chil Hashem. I think it's really important not to be an embarrassment to God where we behave in such a fashion where someone says, hey, look, there's a Jewish person or a Jew, that's how the rest of them must behave. And the reason why I say that is that particularly as I've lived in Europe, we have a lot less of us. And where we make a big noise because we do a lot and we give a lot to society and we give a lot to the community. And therefore, it's really important for us to make sure that we are really leaders in what we do, especially with respect to, from a moral and ethical perspective.